I'm speaking with composer Joseph S. DeBeasi here in his lovely home in Los Angeles. Joseph has made an amazing career as one of the industry's premier music editors and composers. His work as a composer and music editor spans across such films as doing additional music for What's Eating Gilbert Grape to being a music editor on films like Book of Eli, Prisoners, and many, many more. Recently, Joseph worked with Clint Eastwood on the score for American Sniper, which just shattered box office predictions and records on its wide release opening weekend. Joseph, thanks so much for inviting me to your home and speaking today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming.
So I always like to start and learn about a composer's kind of path to their career. So when did you start, I guess, with music, and what was that kind of turning point that pushed you towards film and composing?
I started playing trumpet from an early age, fourth grade, being a trumpet player, and played in all bands and got into junior high and high school and played in bands there. And then come time for college, I went to the University of Massachusetts to study classical trumpet and did that for a year and a half, and then realized that's not the direction I wanted to go into. So I went to Berklee College of Music and wanted to really study jazz. So within the first month that I was there was a trumpet brass conference, and not really a conference, but really a gathering. There's not a whole lot of trumpet players there. The school is mainly guitar players, pianists, that kind of thing. So it's probably about 25 of us in this room, and there was a young trumpet player up on the stage giving a lecture. And sitting next to him was the lead trumpet player from the Boston Symphony Orchestra. And this young kid, he was a senior in high school, played amazingly. It was just classical, was just beautiful. His jazz was amazing. He was like double tonguing, triple tonguing, circular breathing. I was just blown away by this player, and I thought, I'm in trouble. If this is what's out there, I'll never make a living as a player. I felt I was pretty good, but not like that.
Yeah.
So that threw me into a crisis. And for the next week or two, I just did a lot of soul searching, walking the streets of Boston. And one night I heard some music that was right on Boylston Street, and I just fell in love with it. What is that? So I followed it to a second-story window. It was at night, so I didn't know what that was. The following day I went there and I was like, oh, this is one of Berklee's buildings. Walked up the flight of stairs, and it was a film scoring department.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't even know there was such a thing. And I changed my major right then and there, and never looked back, really.
Wow.
It was really great. And so, yeah, and the little caveat to the story is that trumpet player was Wynton Marsalis.
Oh, wow.
So he was a young high schooler, just came in and just blew the doors out of all of us. And that's the impact that it had on me, which I'm eternally grateful for.
Right.
You know, oftentimes you get into the place of crisis, but you find gold, you know, when you stick with it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I studied there and graduated from Berklee. Upon graduating, I was able to do a docudrama, scored the docudrama, and then came out to Los Angeles to start to try to find work, like we all do.
Right.
And so that was an interesting time. It was difficult to find work, as I'm sure everybody can relate to. And eventually found myself in New York City working as a music editor. And my first feature film was Dirty Dancing.
Oh, wow.
And that opened the door for me to do a lot more music editing work.
Right.
Even though my love and passion was for composition, and that's what I studied at Berklee. And so, you know, you go where the water flows.
Right.
And over a number of years, I would compose one little thing here, but then do more editing here, and another composition here, and then a bunch more editing jobs. I started doing some of the first temp scores. We didn't always do temp scores.
Right.
And so in New York, I would really love doing temp scores. It was like composing for me. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it just kind of kept on progressing. And about 5 years ago, I made a real conscious decision that if I'm going to compose, I've got to make a choice and start really focusing on composition, getting short films, low budget films, no budget films, whatever I could get my hands on, and start getting involved in that area and those people. And
Right.
so, yeah, 5 years later, I would never dream that I would be here and having worked with Clint Eastwood on American Sniper. So, yeah.
I know before we get to American Sniper, though, you mentioned, your amazing career as a music editor. But I mean, for those who don't know, what exactly is the role of a music editor? I mean, are you working during the recording sessions with the composer? Are you working at all during the edit of the film, the cutting of the film, where the music is placed for like spotting and sessions like that? I mean, how does that work as a music editor's role?
Music editor's role varies quite a bit, and there are times where you're called on during production to prepare music for playback for any kind of music that's going to be shot on location. And so you're there working with producers, musical arrangers, musical directors, preparing click tracks, sometimes just arranging studio space, whatever you can do to assist and make it happen. And then you move forward into doing a temp score, as I had mentioned earlier about doing temp scores.
Right.
Not every music editor does a temp score, and then there are some music editors out in Los Angeles that just do temp scores.
Yeah, just temp editors.
That's their gig, and so that's part of a music editor's role. And then and that happens during a director's cut. Usually, sometimes it's like the fourth weekend, and a picture editor would really like to have somebody help massage a scene or what works, what doesn't work. I always like temping because it helps. You're allowed to fail. You're part of your job is to go, oh, this doesn't work.
Right. Find what doesn't work.
Yeah, and that's so valuable. The hard thing is for a composer, a lot of the creative exploration has already been done. And so that's difficult. That's a difficult situation. And whenever I'm temping, I try to involve a composer as much as I'm able. Sometimes a composer's not even on board yet.
Wow.
But it varies, and you just try to be flexible with everything. So from there, once you're done with temping, you're then helping the composer get prepared for the recording session, which you're preparing all of the Pro Tools sessions for that. You're getting any of the pre-records, you're lining them up with click tracks, you're helping the orchestrator make sure that MIDI is aligning with pre-records, that click tracks are matching up with what's printed on the page for the score. You're responsible for all the technical aspects of a recording session. And then you do go to the recording session, and you're there, your eyes and ears as well with the composer. You're listening, you're taking notes, you're being an asset in any way you can.
Right.
And then you go follow through with the mix, and you're there, and you know where all the bones are buried in the mix. So you understand where everything lies, what the intent of the composer was, what the director is hoping for.
Right.
And from there you take it to the dub stage, and you're there to represent the music to make sure it works well with picture, that everything is blended nicely with dialogue and with sound. And it's always good to have good working relationships with your engineer, your re-recording engineer, sound supervisor, sound editors, because it's a collaborative effort. And when you have good relationships, you have an amazing soundscape.
Yeah.
And from after that, a music editor must pull all the music together for delivery, does a music cue sheet, turns everything in, packs up, and goes home.
Wow. That's a long list of qualifications that are needed.
It's a lot of work.
But I can imagine it's such a amazing kind of training for that kind of role in the industry, and to learn and to learn really from the inside out.
Yeah, it really is. Working with different picture editors has taught me different sensibilities. Working with different genres has taught me different sensibilities. Working with different composers have taught me that same thing. And as a composer, and having worked with other composers, I was able to glean little things that I loved and put them in my little tool bag to go, oh, I want to try that.
Yeah, yeah.
I would never have thought of approaching it this way. So for me, music editing has been an amazing training ground. In addition to, you get an education, right? So you go to Berkeley and you get an education, or you can go to any college, whatever, you feel is good for you as a person who wants to be a composer, and you learn the mechanics, you learn your instrument ranges, you learn orchestration, you learn all of that, the theory of music. But the application of it is experience.
Yeah, you can't be taught that, in the classroom.
Yeah, and having an openness about it all is so key, and there's a lot of fun for that exploration.
So I'll dive into American Sniper, which, my goodness, it broke a record or two this past weekend.
Yes,
So congrats on that.
Thank you.
How did this project come to you? It placed you alongside one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, and to work on the music with him, who's also known for his music for his films as well. How did this project come to your doorstep?
That's a great question, and it came through the picture editors, Joel Cox and Gary Roach. I worked with them on the movie Prisoners, and so they knew me. And one day, I was at Warner Brothers visiting a friend. I had just called, I think I called them or maybe emailed them saying, hey, I'm going to be up at Warner's just visiting somebody. It's okay, I stop by and say hi.
Yeah.
And I got a reply, sure, come on by. And then about 15 to 20 minutes later, I got a text, so when are you going to come by? Because we need some music in this film. And I knew they were working on Sniper, and I'm like, what? So I went and met with them, and they explained to me the situation that was happening for them, that they originally, Clint was not wanting to have any kind of music in any of the Iraq scenes, or any kind of underscore, I shouldn't say music, underscore in the film, because he wrote the piano themes already.
Right.
Taya's theme. He already had that written and recorded. But during the editing process, both Joel and Gary felt like there needed to be some more emotional support musically. So I went, we chatted about it. I met the producer, Rob Lorenz, as well, and we chatted about possibilities. And I went home, came here to my studio, and wrote about 8 or 10 pieces of music on spec. Just I see what you're talking about. I think I understand the genre of what you're looking for in this film, and emotionally what you're looking for. And so I said, I'll write some stuff, cut it in, see where it goes. You know, if you like it, great. And if Rob likes it, great. And if Clint likes it, great. Let's play.
Right.
you know? And so that's what I did. And over a period of a month of hurdles, waiting a couple of weeks, not hearing anything, getting a phone call, it's been cut in, and I like it, Rob likes it, gonna send something to Clint, waiting another week or so, not hearing anything, thinking, oh well, that's the end of that. Well, Clint likes it, and we'll see what happens. And then finally the phone call, which is, would you be available to come in to meet with Clint to talk about the music that you've written and to see if there's possibilities here. And I'm like, absolutely. And so that's what happened. I went in and met with Clint, and Bradley Cooper was there. He's the producer of the film, and he was also in town doing ADR, so the timing worked out. And so my first experience there was walking in the door, sitting down on a couch with me, Clint Eastwood, and Bradley Cooper. And I don't really have words to express how amazing that really was.
That's incredible. I mean, that's amazing how just stuff like that just develops and happens. So, I mean, did you have to... I mean, Clint, he is a musician as well. He's a jazz musician and composer, and he writes for his films. I mean, did you have to adapt your workflow to accommodate a director who is also a composer? I mean, did it present more challenges? Was he more critical about the music, or was it easier to speak to him musically, that he, knew everything, like in musical terms?
I would have to say probably yes to all of that. It was very easy to speak with him on musical terms, and he's a man who knows what he wants, and is very gracious and open to ideas. And it was really a great experience to be able to talk about possibilities. So it was really an openness in all of that, and I'm just so grateful for his generosity in that way. There was never really any kind of friction or anything to that. It's like, he doesn't understand, or I don't understand him. There was a lot of latitude for me to try something. Let's try something there. Let's try something that way. So
that's how it should be, I think. So did you guys have? You kind of explained the process, that it was a lot of kind of trial and error and seeing what worked. And you said you tried an orchestral score at first. I mean, so how did that process do? Like, what didn't work, and how did the final product come to be? Like, what was the musical goal, and how did you kind of achieve that?
So after I sent up the spec cues, Joel Cox, the editor, edited them all in areas along with some other temp music that he had, and put that in the film. And so when I finally had my meeting, there was a temp score already laid out, with most of it the stuff that I had written. And so once I came on board, I was under the impression that this is the score. So I needed to get it back into MIDI form. I needed to embellish. I needed to finesse. I needed to reorchestrate. And so I went on that process of doing that. And it was an orchestral score that I had written for those spec cues. So as I've gone through that process, after a couple of days, I had a show and tell with Clint and really the whole team, Bradley and Joel and Gary and Rob. And it was going really well. It's like, okay, there's a couple of cues, approved, great, and did it. Then a couple of days later, we did another one. And then I think at Friday, which was the end of my first week there, we did one more show and tell. And Clint... it was good. We had cues approved, a couple of notes here and there, kind of a typical process. And Clint just turns to Rob and said, "Make sure he goes and hears the sound design." And Clint gets up and everybody kind of does their thing and moves on, and I'm continue working. So Rob came back in and took me over to the sound designer's office, and while we were walking over there, he said that Clint's thinking about not using any music at all in these Iraq scenes.
Just going with the sound.
Just going with sound design. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Which sounds like what typically he would do.
Right. And so we went down, sat down, listened to the sound design, and I totally understood why. It was pretty full. And it was very electronic, and it was spectacular. And I said at that point, I was like, I understand why. I said, in the musical scenes, it's there, but it does lack that extra emotionality that we would want to support in the scene. And I said, but I understand why an orchestral score is not going to work. I can see that, and I think that we need to discuss whether or not music is going to support sound design, or what are we going to do here. So I asked the sound designer for a stereo bounce of all of the music scenes that we had spotted, and started to think how the music should work in conjunction with the sound design. And so in that Monday, we had another meeting, Rob, myself, Joel. I think Clint at that time had gone back to up in Carmel, where he lives, and we were just talking about how an orchestral score in these scenes in Iraq made us feel like it's a movie.
Right.
Like it's not like it's, I don't want to say that, because it's not like it needed to be a documentary.
Right, right.
But it didn't need to be like movie.
Romanticized, kind of. Well, yeah.
A little bit too much sheen.
Right, right.
So we just chatted about it. I said, well, why don't I just do an electronic score? Let's just go and do synth score and start matching sounds and start adding the emotional element that's not there.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, the reaction was, well, show us what you mean.
Yeah.
So I set out to do that. And so that was how we progressed.
Right.
And so we canceled the orchestra date and, you know, changed all that stuff around and started refocusing on, what instruments are we going to record? I did keep some orchestral instruments like French horns, bass clarinets, because I wanted the reediness, the kind of grovelly sound down low, strings, of course, and then a host of sounds that you go through a palette and you start tweaking and going, oh, this would be interesting. Well, I'm not sure about that, and there was a real concern about staying away from ethnic sounds.
Right, which a lot of the modern warfare films kind of become almost a cliche now. Right. Yeah.
And I should say that before I wrote the spec cues, I asked Rob for copies of Letters from Iwo Jima and Flags of Our Fathers. I wanted to see how Clint handled war music.
Right.
And it was a very interesting study to see how all of that was handled. And for me, what I perceived was there's lots of subtlety, and music was not narrative so much, but more commentary.
Right, yeah.
And that really made a difference in my approach, because rather than being narrative that tell you, this is bad, here we go, it's more like you let the scene play and then let the actor have a moment, the moment, and then the music responds as though the audience would respond.
Right, yeah.
And so it was really, it was very helpful for me. And so as I went back into rethinking the synth score, it was really focusing in on that element, because, go back to the orchestral score, I really didn't have much control on that because it was already edited and temped, and so there was just a different approach to it. So we moved forward. I kept on writing, and we sent things up to Clint, and within a week we're in the recording session.
Wow.
So it was about a week to get it all done. And it still wasn't sure whether that Clint wanted to use it.
Wow.
It was just, it wasn't until we're on the dub stage, and it's like, okay, that stayed in. Let's see what happens in the next reel. So it was exciting.
Yeah, like kept you on the edge of your seat kind of process. So the film it's getting a lot of attention because it's based on a real person's life, Chris Kyle, who tragically was murdered. Did the fact that Chris Kyle himself was involved in this project, before he was murdered, his family was involved, did that put a sense of pressure, a sense of responsibility when you were working on this? Or did you kind of, it's not a documentary, but it's almost an homage to this man's life. Did that put more weight on this project than a normal fictional kind of project?
I think the weight came from the story itself, not so much of the family's involvement. There's a lot of honoring of the family and respect for the family.
Right.
And I've heard, I've heard Bradley even say, not directly to me, but while we're in the dub stage or whatever, how important it is to really reflect Chris Kyle in an authentic way, in the way he was. And so it was on our minds to be respectful in it, because the film is a human story,
right?
and it's a tragic story.
Yeah.
And I think that is the focus, at least for me, was the emotional thread, and following that through.
Mm-hmm.
That was the most important thing I found. And never once did I feel pressure
Mm-hmm.
because of family involvement.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, it was the story itself
Mm-hmm.
was important to honor it.
And so, because in that situation, I mean, how did you treat this film? Because the war genre, you can write critical essays about, what is war? What are war films? There's so many different types of war films. I mean, was this a film that was memorial to this man's life, or was it an examination of PTSD, or was it meant to show brutality of modern warfare? I mean, how did Clint treat it, kind of tell you what this film was about, and did that kind of affect how you approach the score at all?
Well, Clint never sat down with me and talked to me about his vision. Right. It's evident on the screen.
Right.
And so I can only tell you what my feelings and opinion is about the approach, or how I felt about it. And I never felt it was a war story. It was a human story that takes place in a war. And it became a tragic story about a man who got wrapped up into something and almost lost it.
Yeah.
But worked hard to come back and ground himself. And, do you call it irony, tragedy, losing his life and helping others back home. So that to me is what the story was about. It just happened to be wrapped up in a war that becomes highly charged in politics and lots of people's opinions, and I understand that.
And I think the writer, he said that he saw it as a Western in a way. Do you see that at all?
I did hear that.
Because I'm a huge Western fan, and I couldn't
say that.
Yeah,
I can see how.
But looking at genre
one
archetypes,
could look at that, and come up with that.
Yeah.
Again, for me, I guess it's because I follow emotional threads.
Right.
More than, I don't want to say more than genre, but genre kind of dictates.
Yeah.
Instrumental color.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and some style.
Mm-hmm.
For me, musically speaking.
Right.
The emotionality, the story, dictates what you're writing, the text, versus subtext. And so I never looked at this as war story. You need to have these kind of instruments.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Right.
I looked at it as human story.
Right.
Where's the heart in this, and how do we want to support it?
Okay.
How do we, one of the earlier discussions that I had on my first meeting with Rob, Joel, and Gary is that I can see how easy this is to become melodrama with the wrong kind of music.
Right, absolutely, yeah.
It's because there's so much emotion already on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the reasons why we also had not that much music. It wasn't 40 minutes worth of score.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't need it. The emotion was already there.
Right.
And that's what I tend to zero in on, is cinematic language that's going to help me understand the scenes and what the story is of the scene, and the emotional feeling of, is it all there? Do we need a little bit more? Do we need a little less? Do we need commentary? What does music need to say, if it needs to say anything at all?
Right. If it's needed, yeah.
Yeah, and so the war aspect of it all, or the Western, or any of that kind of stuff, honestly, just didn't even come across my screen.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, what was your reaction when you read the weekend box office numbers for MLK weekend?
My reaction was, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? And I was...
what happens next?
What is this? And my wife, Krista, was like, this is good. Just breathe and just let it all happen, And that's really, it seemed to be like a wave that you just you just ride it, you just watch it happen. You're not in control. I mean, we're not in control of anything anyway.
Right.
And but it was like, you know, how do you respond to it? I guess that's what you're in control of, right?
Yeah.
Your responses to things. And it just was be open. It was quite exciting. It still is.
I know.
I mean, I'm seeing more things happening now, and in terms of people's responses and commentaries from other people about what film meant to them. Just people that I know who have been in military.
Right.
It's such a huge impact.
I mean, how do you feel as a composer knowing that your work was heard by that huge audience? I mean, not just a national audience, but it's, you know, doing business internationally too. I mean, your music is now worldwide, and even though they might not know it, they're not, you know who you are, but it's, you know, affecting them in the narrative. I mean, must be profound for a composer.
It is, and it's humbling. Mm-hmm. I don't want to think about it too much because it makes me well up and get emotional because, you know, you're in this to help people connect to themselves, connect to their world and their environment and people in their lives. I think that's part of the purpose of movies, right? We go into a dark room, it's safe, we watch this film, you start relating to people on the screen, and you're moved. And to be part of that process is an honor. It's humbling, it's exciting. And to think of it on a grand scale, the question you just asked is, I think, too hard for me to fathom.
So to wrap up, I always love to ask composers this one question.
Okay.
That's not related to, you know, the film or anything, but if you could score any film ever made, pretending the original score never existed, pretending it never even came to be, so it's a blank slate, what film would you choose?
I think I did. This is what an honor and an amazing opportunity it was to work with a man like Clint Eastwood.
Wow, okay.
And on a film like this that has the story of such impact. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's not like I can't go, gee, I wish I did Star Wars.
Right.
I don't feel that way.
Yeah.
I feel very honored and proud to be a part of this film, and I think this is a dream job. Yeah.
Well,
sounds
a
cliche,
great answer.
but honestly, that's really how I feel.
Well, maybe a little bit more generically, what's your favorite genre to score?
My favorite genre to score is psychological thriller.
Okay.
If Clint Eastwood was going to do a Michael Clayton type film, I would be like, please, sir, may I have another? May I please do that film?
Well, those are the most fun scores too.
Oh my gosh, I absolutely love getting into the mind of the characters and interpreting that musically without overstepping, and giving us room to play in that area. Absolutely love doing that. Yeah.
Well, that's a great answer too. That's one of my favorite genres. Joseph, thank you so much for your time. Thanks so much for inviting me to your home and speaking. It's been a really enlightening experience. So thank you.
No, thank you very much. I'm honored.